Everyone, and welcome back to You Know More. My name is Mireya. I am the creator and host, and I'm really excited to have you all join me today. Before jumping into the essence of the show and the amazing lineup of guests that we have, I wanted to discuss why I found it necessary to take this break. I had this dream of building this podcast, and I finally executed on it. And then at the same time, immediately after, took this long break. And a lot of that was my own personal triggers coupled with, 2024 was a disaster, but it was a necessity. This is probably the scariest thing that I've ever done. Building a public display of my personal thoughts and feelings and putting myself out there was extremely stressful and anxiety inducing. And I realized I wasn't ready to put myself out there. As someone who has spent their entire life masking and performing and surviving and enduring and dissociating, and everything that I'm doing is kind of the antithesis of my survival. And that's the point of the entire show, actually. It's that scary moment of stepping outside of your trauma. Putting myself out there, I realized, why was I so afraid about talking about something that has been a large part of my life and that so many people suffer from? My biggest fear in life is being seen. And it is the one thing that I absolutely crave. This idea of putting myself out there and people seeing me for who I am and having this permanent concrete recording of my thoughts that I can't take back is scary. And not because I don't believe in the things that I'm saying, but because growing up, I was conditioned to understand that being myself was terrifying, that being myself attracted very bad negative attention. It attracted, well, I'm actually going to leave it at that. It just attracted negative attention. And there was always punishment for it. Even saying that, I'm like, fuck, I want to cry. It's awful, but it's the truth. And I feel that it's important that people know who I am. I didn't really grow up having this normal transformation of adolescence and teenagehood and early adulthood. And I really wanted to create this podcast because I was so tired of hiding myself. But I realized I was putting myself out there on a very massive stage for anybody to find me. And I couldn't hide in any way. It's kind of like I'm propelling myself out of my trauma world as I see it. I see this life that I've created and this persona that I've become. And over the last year, I have watched that person die. I stepped away from talk therapy a couple of years ago, and in the last year, I've been exploring acupuncture, which was wildly just informative. It it allowed me to sit in my body and just say, okay, I'm here to listen. Tell me what I need to know. And so my body just began unpacking at the speed of light. And all of a sudden I was understanding a lot of my core fears. And the biggest one especially was, no one can trust me. No one can trust what I can say. And obviously that immediately relates to the podcast. Like, I'm putting out my personal feelings and then inviting people on the show. And it's, well, why should you trust me? Like, who am I? Because growing up, I was understood as this bad person. I demonized myself because I was demonized. I had very abusive people around me who made me feel completely awful about myself, to the point where I felt that I could only exist on the outskirts of life. So propelling myself to center stage, it was, you can't trust me. What do I know? What am I doing here? But it wasn't just about people being able to trust my opinion or my beliefs or the perspective that I'm taking with the show. It was understanding. I felt that through all the things that I went through growing up, I felt that I was incapable of being strong and being protective of myself. I'm not a superhero. I don't have super strength. I don't have the ability to protect myself. So how could anybody listen to me and help themselves? And the greatest thing that I learned last year was I didn't lose. I never lost. I had this idea that because I couldn't fight back, that I was a loser and the other people in my life were winners and I was just never going to make it in life, that I could never overcome. I used to think surviving trauma, the word survivor, I never liked it and I never applied it to myself because it felt weak to me. And in my 20s, I'm like, no, no, I'm a warrior. Like, I can get through this. I can get through anything. And I look back at it now and I think I am a survivor. And it allowed me to realize that I am capable. I was just vulnerable. I was caught off guard. Trauma can be defined in so many ways, and people see it differently in relationship to themselves or in association to other people, right? Like, so when I think of trauma, I think of it as this moment of impact that completely catches us off guard, that we're not equipped for. It is overwhelming. It is difficult for us to process. And so we dissociate, and in a way, it becomes inaccessible to us. This experience that we've had, that we've memorized, is in a way inaccessible to us. So going back to grappling with this idea of not wanting to be a survivor, thinking that I'm this incapable person, moving into the understanding of, oh, I am capable. I am capable. I was just in a vulnerable position. I was not prepared. And I mean, I don't think anybody's prepared for trauma. Nobody is prepared for war or becoming a refugee or for losing their child. Nobody is prepared for these things. And trauma is wildly stigmatized. So there's a shame that has been built into it and that people naturally have begun to inherit because of the dialogue, because of the narrative that we've created. And so I felt a lot of shame. I was silent for many years about the things that I experienced. But it was that moment for me. It was like, enough. Ya basta, no more. Like, stop. I I couldn't handle the pain. I couldn't handle this idea that I went through hell and that I was going to be stigmatized for it. Like, why am I the recipient of all of this? Why are people shamed into silence? Why are we made to feel incapable or defected or crazy? It's exhausting carrying around all of these narratives in our head when the reality is we all just went through something terrible. We weren't incapable. We just had somebody who had the capacity to be violent, to be oppressive, to be abusive, to be mean and cruel. And so I had to say, enough, no more to myself. I learned that I am capable. I learned that I am trustworthy. I learned that what I have to say matters and that it can help people. No, I'm not some professional, but I am someone who has explored these feelings. And trauma is unique. In so many ways, experiences overlap. There are things that are comparable, but trauma is unique because of the way that we shape it in our brains. And so for me, it was understanding I am incapable. I am not the big superhero that I wanted to be growing up, which looking at all the things that I want to do now, it's not being the superhero. It's just being a person and standing up and sharing how I feel and normalizing these experiences. It's okay that I've had these awful events in my life. It's okay that I have complex PTSD. It doesn't mean that I'm mentally disabled. And I don't think that anybody should feel that way. So as I started returning back to this podcast and understanding how do I want to show up? How do I want to feel? I started to reassess the mission of the show. And I started off, with this whole like, we're going to dive into the neuroscience and the psychology and the systems of, and we're definitely going to do that. But to break it down, this really is a show about, I envision a world without trauma. And I know that's not going to be entirely possible in my lifetime, but it's a start. And one of the reasons that propelled me to create this show is I actually feel more alienated being healed. This has been a very isolating experience. In so many ways before, I didn't relate to my peers because I was going through things that nobody around me was. None of my friends, none of my community or the peers around me, people my age, were experiencing the things that I was. And I felt very isolated from the crowd while everybody was exploring their careers and traveling and understanding the things that they wanted to do. I was in therapy and I was trying to figure it out. And I was trying to not be afraid of myself and the world around me. I used to have this, like, I would call it like the wave of anger, where I just felt like the entire world was angry at me. And so I had my relationship with life was, how do I move past that? While I saw my friends going off and traveling the world and having these extraordinary experiences. And then 11 years later, I'm now in this space of I'm figuring out my career. I know who I am. I know what I want. I'm putting myself out there. But at the same time, I have all this experience of healing through trauma, and not just trauma itself, but equipping myself to be stronger, not just mentally, but emotionally. But I found myself around a lot of people who were still in a lot of pain and were not able to access those feelings and where they came from because they're too overwhelming and it's scary. Because I felt so severed from the world around me growing up, everything that I have done has always been in an effort to plug back in. And that's just not for myself. It's not just about me healing from trauma. I started to understand that so many people around me were in pain and I needed to show up with that self-awareness, but above all, that compassion, even when people really pissed me off. And I understood this is a community effort. This is not just my journey, it's everybody else's as well, because we're all hurting. And again, it goes back to trauma is a unique experience, but at the same time, it's affecting way too many of us. It is an epidemic, it is a mental health crisis, and it's not spoken about enough. I've learned in the way that I engage in my relationships that I have this emotional capacity to offer. I can show up for my friends in this way as much as my friends, even though they didn't understand me, they supported me and they tried their hardest to understand where I was coming from, and they appreciated me above all. So I realized in the way that I can reciprocate is holding space for the people around me and learning that even though I had this different trajectory, I kind of looked at it as like, okay, everybody else has like 10 years of experience in this field, so they're in this job. And I'm like, well, I've got, you know, like a couple of decades worth of trauma experience, but I've got 10 years almost worth of experience of how do you overcome these things? How can I show up for the people around me? How can I connect with individuals? How can I connect with communities? And so it questioned the scale of the podcast. It questioned the scale of the episodes. I didn't want to fixate on individuals overcoming trauma and the experience itself, because I said this before, I think in the first podcast episode. I don't like trauma bonding. I don't want to bond with you over the horrible things that you've gone through in life. I want to bond with you over the beautiful healing that you've done. I want to bond with you over who you are as a person. I am excited to know you and not the outcome or the coping mechanism from your trauma, from the difficulties of your life. I think so much of the time we bond together over these terrible things, and it's, can we create an opportunity to bond over healing? Can we create an opportunity to celebrate ourselves and celebrate the world that we are actively creating every day and showing up for, even when it's scary? That's real courage right there. And that's the space that I understood that I wanted to create. I don't want to fixate on trauma. There's already a conversation there. There are so many experts out there. There are so many podcasts and social media accounts that offer counseling and help, that I understood I want to come at this and exploring how do we address the systems and the behaviors and the narratives that continue to perpetuate trauma? How do we come together collectively in a space and say, okay, I'm done. I want to move on. I want to come back to myself. I want to live the life that I dream of. I'm tired of being in survival mode. For me, I don't have all the answers, obviously, but in creating this show, it's become this vehicle to explore that and to meet people and say, what are the possibilities? And if we revise the medical system, what are the possibilities if we were able to rewrite the legal system? What if we were able to sit down with people and hold space for those tough conversations? Hold space for the honest truth, the very painful truth, and say, hi, you hurt me, or hi, I am hurt, and be able to communicate with one another rather than silencing ourselves. Because a podcast is vocal. It is vocalizing those feelings. And what I really want to do here is just be able to have those tough conversations because I've been having them for years. The things that I actively and subconsciously avoided, I had to learn how to slowly unpack and unravel those very big emotions. And part of stepping out of survival is asking for help. It's getting support. It is a community effort, which is what we're doing in this show. Bringing guests on and talking about, hey, how can we revise the healthcare system to better incorporate the cost and care of trauma? A system with a history of not recognizing PTSD in war veterans and calling it shell shock, of avoiding these, at times, controversial conversations. But are they really controversial? No, they're just uncomfortable. And so much of the time, people don't want to have them. That's why so many victims they bear the brunt of all this pain and all this violence. Because nobody wants to really deal with violence. It's hard. We weren't born with the tools to deal with, to overcome, to face trauma, to face violence, to face oppression. These are very negative experiences. And it's hard to have a conversation about it. But it needs to happen, or else it's just going to continue to perpetuate. So much of the time when we talk about trauma and healing from it, there's always the discussion of breaking the cycle. It's not just you're healing from this experience that you've endured, but you are breaking the cycle of perpetuating it. And that is a whole other discussion for another episode. But one of the more painful aspects of healing from trauma is actually stepping outside and away from it. Because you are stepping away from everything that you have learned, the person that you have been in order to survive this chaotic, painful experience that is obstructed and in a lot of ways uprooted people's lives. And so stepping outside of that means trusting yourself again, trusting in the world around you. And there's two major things right there. It's believing that you are capable of living in a world that you feel betrayed by or that you are scared of because you've had experiences that confirm and validate those feelings. Those experiences really happened. They were real. The other part of that is why addressing trauma as a community is so imperative. Because it's about everybody taking action to ensure that these cycles do not continue, so that these structures do not live on where they negatively impact people. It is a collective effort to say stop. Why would anybody want to be in pain? And the thing about trauma is it is not beholden to any particular demographic. It could be you. It could be anybody. So it's important that we create safety nets. It's important that we create support systems and resources. It's important that we create compassion and empathy within ourselves. It's important that we recognize the signs of what trauma really is, because so much of the time trauma is characterized as somebody who is crazy or mentally ill and defected or weak-minded, somebody who is using alcohol or substances. A lot of coping mechanisms are actually just methods of self-soothing, which in a lot of ways is important to surviving because it's about staying alive while being able to mediate and navigate these very overwhelming and powerful feelings. A lot of the times when we see people post traumatic event, we are seeing this outward expression of pain and we're not understanding the inner turmoil that that person has gone through. We dehumanize people, and that's where that stigma comes from. It's removing the person and saying all that's left is this crazy individual or this crazy community of people. We have to collectively come together to ask, what is life after trauma? And that is what we're going to be exploring here. The way that I understand and starting to take those steps forward is placing some ground under our feet, stepping back into reality and being present by creating an open dialogue, inviting guests in, inviting the community in. I really do mean it when I say I want to hear from you all, and creating that ground for us to stand on, for us to sit together and come together. It allows us this really fantastic opportunity of discussing, okay, well, what is the world that I want to build? What is the life that I want to create for myself to live in? It's having this open dialogue and saying, okay, if we collectively don't want to experience this anymore, what do we collectively want? It's kind of like a town hall meeting, but it's also being able to gauge uncomfortable settings. It's being able to hold accountable people that hurt you and recognizing that the predator is the person in the wrong and not the victim for bringing up something so uncomfortable. The problem shouldn't be there in the first place. And this is really discussing preventative care. How do we stop trauma before it begins? How do we break these cycles? Whether we are the person who has been personally and directly affected by it, or we are the friend to, the neighbor of, a peer in the community who understands that people are hurting. I think one of the larger conversations that I'm understanding as I'm doing these guest episodes is there's a divide between people who experience trauma and people who have never experienced trauma. We need to be able to have these conversations with each other without fear of what seems uncomfortable or controversial. That's what that ground looks like to me. It's being able to establish this is okay to talk about. Because ultimately, I think for the most part, we all actually share very similar values. We just have very different perspectives of it. All of us are seeking security, whether it's physical security or financial security. I think for the most part, nobody wants to experience pain. Nobody wants to be the recipient of war or violence, racial injustice. Nobody wants to be impoverished or finding out how to survive in their family home. Nobody wants these things. It takes a community. It takes people coming together and saying, hey, that's not okay. That's not allowed to continue. That behavior is not accepted. So I think the first step is really being able to just say the words out loud, not being silenced, not being afraid. I really believe that that is the step forward. It's not the fixation of what's happened. It's not the trauma bonding. It's not marinating in our pain. It's saying, that's not okay. No more. Imagine a world of people who have healed, who are able to move from something that they believed was going to destroy them. Imagine alleviating yourself from that pain and stepping back into who you are. Knowing the strength that you've cultivated, that you have found within yourself, that you have practiced over and over and over to get to this point of healing. Can you imagine how empowering our communities would be? Can you imagine the conversations that we would be able to hold with each other? What we would no longer find acceptable? What we would no longer shame? Can you imagine the emotional connections and intimacies that we would be able to create with each other? Because we would say what we want, we would say what we feel, we would put our boundaries down. This is life after trauma. It's exciting. And I understood that in this last year. I understood that I wanted to not focus on the negative aspects and in offering, you know, services, counseling, or hearing people overcoming the street, because that's already out there. I think the more exciting part is moving beyond it, having the opportunity and the possibility to reinvent our communities. I had a conversation with somebody the other day, and they're like, well, nothing's going to change because this is a collective effort and we're not all going to align unanimously. And at the end of the day, it's like, what are you talking about? You're giving me this doomsday. Nothing's ever going to change. We're just hurling towards the end. It's like we're facing a black hole. And it's just death and destruction. I didn't heal to accept that narrative. No, because I know that it's possible to move beyond it. That's why it's important to take collective action. That's why it's important to be able to have these conversations. So I believe that together we can have this conversation of what really are our values? What do we want to create based off of our beliefs, based off of our need for safety and security, but also the exciting ability to reinvent the world that we live in, as I said before. A lot of the times, and this is something that I've personally done, when you don't heal, trauma becomes your entire identity. You don't have this space to be curious because you're surviving. You don't have this space to be curious about how to live your life or what you want to pursue further because you're understanding that in this moment in time, which is every moment in time moving forward, that you are stuck in a standstill where you have to keep it together so that you don't have to endure that. Because if you couldn't get out of it the first time or the second time or the third time or however many, people internalize this idea of, I can't protect myself, so I have to control my circumstances. You become your survival mechanisms to release ourselves and one another from this pain, to hold space from each other, to recognize the wrongs. We begin to not essentially minimize the problem, but we lessen it over time because we're not tolerating it and we're giving people the opportunity to overcome it so that it doesn't impact all of us. Trauma is this invisible, intangible, amorphous thing. It's contagious. And it's not contagious in the way that a disease or a virus is. It's contagious in that it affects everyone around them. It's hurt people, not because they're intentionally trying to do so, but when people are in pain, they lash out, they project. It affects their family, it affects their friends, it affects the community. And when you have enough people who are suffering and in pain, it collectively brings down the community. And so by coming together and recognizing the signs and having the conversation and becoming aware and informed allows the community to uplift itself, to elevate itself, to empower itself. Even if you're not affected by trauma, you are affected by the people around you. Your relationships are impacted. It's how people show up in the world that you collide with, that you engage with and interact with, that you build intimate relationships with. And I think it's important that we all begin to prioritize collectively, communally, together, and realizing that people aren't sick or crazy, but that they went through something painful and having empathy and compassion for them. We need to prioritize healing. We need to prioritize the world that we want to live in, ultimately understanding who we are, being able to enjoy one another. There is an end to trauma. We never fully escape the things that have hurt us, but it doesn't have to affect you in the same way. And knowing that there is a life beyond trauma is what's important. I think that's really why I'm here. I feel like saying this is possible to anybody who's ever doubted me, to thinking that people can just be traumatized their entire life and that's it, that they've just somehow died in a way and they'll never recover. No, trauma has an end, and you end it. I think that everybody deserves to heal. Everybody deserves to move from their pain, to feel empowered, to feel whole again, to feel human again. Like I said, trauma, the way that it has been treated, has dehumanized people. And it's enough. It's exhausting. I am not interested in it anymore. I am not interested in myself or anyone around me being seen as a disabled person because they went through hell. Fuck, you are strong. The fact that you went through it, the fact that you are, even if you haven't received the help that you need or want, you are still strong. And you are still persevering through it. And that is amazing. And I applaud you. And it is inspiring. Now it's time for you to heal. Now it's time for all of us to heal and for us to come together and have a conversation. With that said, you can join me every Tuesday together as we say no more. Thank you to everyone for tuning into this episode and to everyone who has supported me. And I'm more excited to continue the conversation with you all. See you guys next episode. Thank you to everyone for listening in. My hope for this podcast is that it can be of help to anyone looking to overcome their own trauma. And above all, to know that there is life after trauma. While I'm here to hold the tough conversations, envisioning a world without trauma takes a collective effort. So I want to hear from you. I want to create this conversation as a community. You can connect with myself in the show by commenting or sending me a DM at nomore.podcast on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky, and keep up with all the latest episode reels on TikTok. You can follow the conversation and listen on all major podcast platforms, including Spotify, Apple, and iHeart, or watch and subscribe on YouTube. Together, we are putting a stop to trauma. Together, we are saying no more.